Hi there, this is Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn. I post videos about plants and projects, and today we are talking about growing potatoes. I want to do this video and a series of other videos about some of the great beginner crops you can get started with if you are brand new to gardening, and walk you through the process of how to grow them and some of the reasons you might want to grow them. So potatoes aren't exactly the most expensive thing to buy at the grocery store, so you may be wondering, why would I like to grow potatoes when I can just go get a giant bag of them at the grocery store for pretty cheap, at least right now? And there are a couple reasons why I think growing potatoes is a really great beginner crop to grow. First of all, they are pretty cost effective if they are done properly. So one seed potato can yield like multiple pounds of potatoes if your growing conditions are right. The second reason is that they are very easy to grow, so they're adaptable and flexible with their growing conditions, unlike some other plants that are pretty particular. And the third reason that I recommend potatoes for beginners is because you can store them without canning, freezing, drying, any of those other preservation methods if you just let them cure properly for a couple of weeks. They have a shelf life of, in my experience, several months before they start to sprout eyes and go bad. So let's talk seed potatoes now. I picked some seed potatoes up last night at my local big box garden center. I got potatoes last year from Tractor Supply, but honestly, it was way more than I needed or had space to grow. So when I saw these little 4-packs of different types of potatoes at our local Lowe's, I decided to just pick up 2 of them and try to do this year. Now, seed potatoes are good because they are certified disease-free, and you don't have to worry about introducing any sorts of diseases into your garden. That said, a lot of people grow potatoes from grocery store potatoes. I am not anti-growing things from grocery store produce at all, and I think it is a very viable way to grow your own potatoes. I actually haven't heard firsthand or even secondhand in the many gardening groups I'm in of people who have had issues growing store-bought potatoes in terms of like disease or introducing things into your garden. And it can be a really cost-effective way to grow potatoes. Now, seed sprouting seed potatoes are not treated with any sort of like seed sprouting agent, and that's because they're sold to be grown. They're sold to sprout, right? But a lot of potatoes in stores can be treated with seed sprouting inhibitors to prevent them from sprouting these little ear things that we've all probably seen growing up when we forget about a bag of potatoes in the bottom of a cabinet. Now, if you do want to go the grocery store route, I suggest picking up an organic potato to use because those are much less likely to be treated with a seed sprouting inhibitor. Now, whatever potato method you choose, whatever type, the first thing you're going to do is cut up larger potatoes into multiple sections. So these were actually pretty small, and this one only has 1 eye on it, so I am leaving this one whole to plant. However, some of the other potatoes in the package, even around the same size, had multiple eyes on them already sprouting, so I cut them in half. Now, this effectively doubles the amount of potatoes that you can grow because each one of these is a seed potato that will turn into its own plant. Some of them were slightly larger, and I cut them in half, just making sure that I got an eye on each side of the potatoes. And after you cut the potatoes in half, just let them sit for, like, I would say overnight, 24 hours. You will notice that they will form kind of like a callus surface. These edges are kind of drying a little bit and curling in. And that's just allowing the cut area of the potato to callus over. And this will help prevent rot and help with moisture regulation in the soil when you plant it. Now, the best time to plant your potatoes really depends on what your climate is. They are a cooler weather crop, so generally you want to wait until your soil is consistently about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can work it at least 12 inches down. It's not frozen through or anything because that is how deep you'll need to dig. Now, as you can see, I am in my little greenhouse. It is a little early to be starting seed potatoes here in Maryland Zone 7A. We're very warm this week, but our temperatures can just be all over the place, and we'd have some crazy cold this year. So I'm going to be starting my seed potatoes in containers in my greenhouse here because I do run a heater at night to keep the greenhouse from dropping below 42 degrees. Now, I'm using buckets, containers, and grow bags, so I will be able to move these out once temperatures are a little bit more consistent here. I will probably move them out early to mid-March, just depending on what the temperatures are looking like, because once I move them out onto my little pad outside of the greenhouse, that means they'll get more light, and I can also let Mother Nature take care of watering. And if there's one less thing I have to worry about watering, that's what I want to do. Now, if you're planting your potatoes in an in-ground garden or a raised bed garden, you want to make sure you choose a sunny location that has pretty good soil drainage. Now, that said, potatoes are highly adaptable, so behind me you can see where I planted our sweet potatoes last year. Now, this was a brand new bed, and our very heavy, dense, clay-based soil here in Maryland is not conducive to a lot of root vegetables. So what I did with this soil is we ended up digging out these 3 rows that are covered with leaves right now, and we didn't double dig the whole rows of beds. We just double dug the areas where we were planting our sweet potato plants. Now, I know sweet potatoes are a tropical potato. They are different from the traditional potatoes that we're talking about today, but they do grow in much the same form underground. They are a root vegetable that will spread, so it needs a somewhat loose, well-draining soil to allow them the space to expand and grow. Now, generally, this is going to be pretty good spacing for growing any kind of potatoes. You will want to plant them at least 12 inches deep and a couple feet apart. Keep in mind that we do have paths here so that we can access anything that we're growing in these rows from all sides. Now, I generally do not use my raised bed space for a lot of my root crops. I opt instead for using this brand new in-ground area or using containers just because it can be easier to dump them out. But if you are using a raised bed, all of these same principles still apply. Now, many people like to grow their potatoes in something like a 5-gallon bucket or a grow bag. And that's because it just kind of allows you to easily hill the potatoes up, which you'll hear people talk about when growing potatoes. You can put a little bit of soil in the bottom, plant your potatoes, and then add more soil as the plants grow. This also makes it easy to harvest your potatoes because you don't need to dig them out like I had to do with my sweet potatoes last year. You can just take the container and dump it out either on the ground or in a wheelbarrow or something like that, and then gently break off your potatoes. Now, today I'm going to be planting my seed potatoes in 2 different containers. One, these grow bags. Now, these grow bags are 12 inches deep, so that is the minimum recommended for growing potatoes, just because they do need a lot of space to grow up. I might recommend even using something a little bit deeper than these, but I got them for free and I have nothing growing in them, so I'm going to throw a couple smaller potato varieties in them to grow. I'm also going to be using a 5-gallon bucket to grow some. Now, this 5-gallon bucket we drilled holes in the bottom of several years ago. I don't even remember what, but I use this for rinsing off produce as a first rinse before it comes into the house. I use this for all sorts of different things like around the yard and garden. But since it does have holes in the bottom, this also makes it an excellent planter because when you water, the water will have somewhere to go out the bottom. Now, this is less important if you're growing in containers, but if you're growing in the ground or raised garden beds, you want to make sure that you are rotating where you plant your potatoes roughly every 3 years. Also, avoid planting them in an area where you had other nightshades planted, like tomatoes or peppers, eggplants. I grow a lot of those things just because they have shared diseases and pests that can overwinter in the soil and then completely foil your potato crop if something is in there from what you were growing last year. And containers can make this process really easy because you can just refresh the soil every year and use the same container. So let's get to planting here. I've given you the bird's eye view of what this grow bag looks like inside of it. I've already got a couple inches of soil to start with, and then I just dug out all the extra to one of these buckets so I can easily transfer new soil as the potatoes grow and I have to hill them up. So I'm going to be starting with 2 of these potatoes that I cut in half and let sit overnight. Now, generally, I would say that you should only plant 1 seed potato in each of these bags, but since I did cut these in half and I have only a few grow bags to work with, I'm gonna go ahead and put these in the same container and just see what happens, because this is a pretty small variety of potato as well. So you're just going to put them down in the soil with the eyes facing up, because remember, these eyes are the growth points. So I will just gently stick them down in here, and then I will take my shovel and cover the seed potatoes with a little bit of soil. After you cover them with a little bit of soil, just even it out a little bit and then give them some water. And then what will happen is when the potatoes start to grow, you will notice little white, it could be white actually, little white stems that turn green coming up through the soil here. and you want to give them a couple, I'd say like a week or two of growth until the stems are like about this much above the soil, just a couple inches, and then you will repeat that same process of digging and adding more soil to your containers. That is what the hilling up process refers to. And for the bucket here, I've already got a little bit more soil in it, so I am just going to bury this one down myself, a couple inches, and then make sure it's covered. Just like that. Now you will want to keep this soil consistently moist but not soggy, so that's usually not an issue early on in the season, but as things get warmer and your potatoes get closer and closer to needing harvested, definitely stay on top of monitoring the moisture, especially if you have them in containers. Generally, things planted in the ground, like I never watered my sweet potatoes, even when we had periods of serious drought. I just let Mother Nature take care of it because I did not want to lead to any sort of rot. But the moisture in containers or pots will get zapped out much faster as temperatures rise where you are. Now remember to keep hilling up your potatoes as the stems grow to the top of your containers. If you're growing in the ground, a good rule of thumb is to hill up about 1 foot and then let them just to continue growing. If you notice that you have flowers on your stems, it's your choice. I think it's best practice to remove the flowers of plants if you are not growing them for flowering or for seed production, because then you can allow the potatoes to put all of their energy into growing potatoes instead of sustaining flowers. And most potatoes will generally be ready for harvesting, digging up or dumping out about 3 to 4 months after you've planted them. Now I'll probably give mine a little bit more time since I am planting them a bit early and the conditions in the greenhouse aren't necessarily as ideal as I would like for faster optimal growth. I will probably start monitoring the foliage on mine around 3.5 months. You definitely want to wait until the foliage you see above the soil surface begins to yellow and die off. If it's doing that and it's been 3 to 4 months since you planted your potatoes, it's time to harvest them. Now, when you harvest your potatoes, if you're going to eat them right away, feel free to wash them. But if you'd like to store them for longer, a couple months, definitely do not wash them off. The skin is very, very delicate before the potatoes are cured, and the dirt on the skin can actually help to preserve the potatoes for a little bit longer. And curing them, unlike sweet potatoes, which is a whole ordeal, a whole process that you have to go through, regular potatoes, all you need to do to cure them is put them in a cool, dark place with good air circulation for 1 to 2 weeks. Now, this could be a basement. If you have one, that's a great place. If it's super humid where you have them, you may want to add a fan or at least make sure to separate the potatoes so they're not all on top of each other, preventing airflow. Now, when they have cured for a week or two, you can throw them in a box or a bag and be a little bit less worried about that airflow. Also, don't make the mistake that I made last year. I was not thinking, I was just throwing things in my basement. I got a big bag of potatoes from my cousin Jimmy. I threw them downstairs to just chill out until we were ready to eat them, and I put them right next to a bag of onions. Again, everyone should know this. We remember seeing sprouting potatoes in our cabinets and closets growing up because they were next to bags of onions probably. Onions release a gas that will encourage potatoes to start sprouting earlier. So if you'd like to retain the shelf life for as long as possible, shoot for a cool, dry, darker place and do not put onions next to them. All right, that wraps up my video all about growing potatoes in containers. I'm going to give these some water and then start monitoring them for their growth. I'll definitely do an update video on harvesting these when the time comes, but until then, happy planting.